Hey, what's going on? TFRlive.com. How is you? It is 6 p.m. That was really bad grammar off the bat. No worries. It is 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Sunday night. This is Try Genesis with Steve Zerilath. And I am doing a special pre-recorded broadcast for you. Very pre-recorded, like about an hour ago pre-recorded. Because I like to play hardball. I have a very special guest I'm excited for, a musical hero who is also a podcasting hero to me, that I had came to realize was the one and the same human being, like back like during the coof when he was on with Thomas Sheridan. And so tonight, my special guest is one who went from a tremendous moment in the gritty underground metal scene of the 90s and evolved into a tremendous voice in the world of talk radio and podcasting for quite some time. And before I knew his work in this field, I shared with him in conspiracy and esoteric talk radio. My listeners from the scene knew him and loved him as the former keyboardist of the UK's Cradle of Filth. Tonight my guest is the immortal Damien Gregori, but he is also known as simply Greg Moffitt, who is the host of Legalise-Freedom.com. So I had to do my quick black metal voice to give you the honors like you were on stage again. How do you feel?
I'm feeling good, thank you. It's Sunday night. It's dark here already. I'm feeling quite tired. It's the end of the day, but if anything is going to get me through to the midnight hour, it's a few hours in your company.
Thank you.
Chewing the fat. So thank you very much for the invite, Zerilath. It's a pleasure to be with you. I may revert to calling you Steve as we go through this.
But I'll try. That's all right. For the audience, I'm going to call you Damien until we stop talking about metal in about 30 minutes.
Okay, so we're both undergoing a bit of schizophrenia then.
It's more like it's more like Days of Future Past, where I'm just channeling my 1996 self through my mind. But anyway, But like overall, so everybody knows, because as I'm setting this up as a metal segment in the beginning, just to let you know what you would be in for if you want to continue listening after the first segment. Legalise-Freedom.com, how Greg puts it on his channel is he poses these questions. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? These are eternal questions which humanity is compelled to ask, but may never answer. And goes through a plethora of the same subject matter that my fans here would be normally used to as subject matter is concerned, which is politics, economics, energy and the environment, culture and control, science, spirituality, consciousness, astronomy, archaeology, and alternative history. So, I wanted to open off the bat. I wanted to tell you a little quick joke that I promised to tell you when I was talking to a couple of my buddies in the scene that are psyched that I got you for this interview. Thank you so much. So back in the day, I was in a band in the Bronx called Brain Dead. I was the bass player for the band. And one of these days, we're having a chit chat with one of our buddies in the band who he can be a little bit scatterbrained and misspeak in very, very funny ways, especially because, English is, he kind of like learned English and Spanish at the same time because he was like Dominican American New Yorker. Right. And we were all talking real fast. There was a conversation about like Cradle of Filth going on. And then I think I said something kind of like neurotic or something, or somebody mentioned like Slayer off in side conversation, and then he went, and then he said, and then with Slayer's keyboardist, and then I just stopped and said, Slayer's keyboardist, and everybody laughed. So that's my Slayer's keyboardist joke. It's kind of lame, but it was really funny when you were there in the studio.
Yeah, well, I mean, who was he? What was he actually thinking of? Was he thinking of Slayer, or thinking of a keyboard player,
We
or what?
were, yeah, no. We were talking about some keyboard stuff that we were gonna be doing with a couple of the songs that we were working on, and we were pulling references from different music that inspired everybody, right? And everybody in that band, including Ed Corpse, my friend, and giving him a shout out. He's a big fan. I favored him with a question. One of these questions is his tonight. He loves that period with Dusk, right? And he's big into those levels of the nitty gritty. Like, so he's just like referencing like, oh, what can I tell Steve to ask Greg? And he's thinking about everything about Dusk and everything about V Empire that he can think of, and trying to not repeat a question that he's heard in an interview. I'm not super nitty gritty, so even I'm a little less of the metal nerd in that respect. But um, but I think where I want to really ask you things first is so the metal world is one of these places that has room for themes that open up the same subject matters that we like to dive into, especially in the cynical perspectives, the highest taboos, the subjects of the occult history, current events, news. So before you left the scene, especially in those cradle years, did any bands or known people you met that uh, inspired you to keep up with those kinds of interests?
I would no, not that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, by the time I was in Cradle, I mean, mid '90s, the whole metal scene was so well established and well developed. It was already two or three generations old, and a lot of these themes that we're talking about were already just part of the fabric of a lot of rock and metal bands' ways of approaching the world. Whether it was something that a worldview that they had that they were projecting out, or whether they were just casting around for subject matter. That was more the case, I think, in the early days. Even think it looked like back in the early days of Black Sabbath. You know, Geezer Butler writing a lot of the lyrics. He's writing about war pigs, and he's writing
Mm.
about space exploration. He's writing about. I recently read his autobiography. Actually, I would recommend that, and all sorts of topics that their songs were about that you'd never really guess. So this is a long way around of answering your question, but
Mm.
so I think those subjects were already there. So when I came into Cradle, I mean, we had, Danny was in control of the lyrics and the themes. I mean, he was open to thoughts and ideas, but really that was his department. So there was no opportunity there, no real desire on my part to try and impose anything else. The band had its oeuvre, it's the stuff it was doing that was right for it, and it was already well established in the underground when I joined. And given that the age that I was at that time, mid 20s, I was I had my own downtime, continued to read and research. So that was, for me, that was more of a period really out of all of that, like a little bit of a cul-de-sac in a way, like a diversion, like, when you're going on a road trip somewhere and you see something interesting, or, a sign for a town or something, you'd say. So I was on the highway of life, and there was a sign that said Cradle of Filth. And I was like, what is that? And just,
Mm.
so, well, I've got time. I'll go and check that out. So no, but I mean, it's like, since that time, I mean, some of these ideas, metaphysical ideas or conspiratorial ideas, and all sorts of topics that you and I delve into have
Mm.
become even more developed within the metal scene. Not
Yeah.
just metal, but it's the one we're really concerned with. And again, off the top of my head, I can't reel off a load of bands, but I've because I spent many years before and after Cradle being in the music media, and working for magazines, and there's been lots of really interesting things that have come up. Sometimes bands like Balsagoth, for example, taking one area, in their case, a kind of alternative history, alternative human timeline, and just at Atlantis and Lemuria and all that, and just diving headlong into it in detail. So
Yeah.
you can also, I think you'll also find that with some other bands that have picked up on one particular thing, it could be like alien life or whatever, and then really run with it.
Yeah, for sure. And then it all kinds of ends up like intersecting with each other, different bands exploring all those themes or being very friendly with bands that are interested in the crossover themes and everything else. Like I saw, seeing Cradle of Filth and Devil Driver just last week. This is what makes it a trip, is I just saw Cradle of Filth. And I was like, oh, and now I'm talking to Greg. Oh, this is fantastic. And like, one's doing like deathcore and the other one's doing gothic black metal, and there's nothing but love for everybody on all those levels, and that's what's cool for me. And especially when I know people, it's just like, oh, my buddy's sitting out because he hates Devil Driver, but I'm there for both of it, right? So you get people that are like that, and it's all good, right? And I know that there's a certain degree that that I think the themes like matter a great deal in who the scene attracts, right? Because I don't see a heck of a lot of people that are specifically death metal that are necessarily interested in what goth metal has to offer, because even though it's heavy and aggressive as such, it's not about the same feelings that a person is experiencing with their life, and it isn't just metal anymore. Now, metal has to have its different factions, which I think is also yet still a good thing.
Yeah, I think it has been. I mean, you mentioned Devil Driver there. Okay, the first thought I had was, "Oh, are they still going?" Well, obviously they must be if they're. but but I stopped working in the music business and the music media. Well, it was a gradual process, but probably completely cut it off about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I would have considered myself an expert in metal. I can no longer claim to be that because I'm not following developments closely.
Right.
But it certainly, that's one thing that you began to see in the 90s, and it continued beyond that, was these, but prior to those years would have been, as you say, maybe bands that didn't see themselves as distinct from metal as such. I mean, we had thrash metal and power metal, death metal. These terms came along quite early on, but there wasn't such clear dividing lines, or people who said, I'm really into gothic metal, or I'm really into female fronted metal, or whatever it happened to be.
Right.
And that
Right.
definitely
Right.
became more and more of a thing.
Yeah.
As time went on. I think there's still people who just plucked albums from wherever, they liked all sorts. I include myself in that category. It's maybe just because of my age. As to where we are right now with all of that, I haven't picked up a metal mag, used to say, in many years. The last metal mag I worked for was possibly the best gig I ever had in the writing scene, and that was Iron Fist, which ran for a few dozen issues, printed, out of London in the UK. I'm sure the back issue is still available, used, it's secondhand, floating around the net. But that was, for me, like trying to get back to basics, but still acknowledge the developments that were continuing to happen in the scene. So, without laboring that point, just if any listeners are interested, just check out Iron Fist mag and just see the sort of coverage that we were doing. We were trying to say, how can we preserve something in all of this splintering, and all this branching off? How can we preserve something that's the core of it, like Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden,
Yeah.
but still acknowledging that new bands are coming along all the time with the classic flavor. And well, I'll just leave it at that. Again, it's rather like around the houses
Yeah.
attempt to answer your question, but I find the more the older I get, the more nuanced answers I want to give to certain questions. And on the other hand, the more direct, no bullshit answers I want to give to other questions. So I find that's an interesting polarization in thinking that I've observed in myself.
Yeah. I feel, I feel the same way, because honestly, when we, it'll become a little bit more evident later on in the show when we're talking about Legalise-Freedom oriented stuff, because of course I see, like, just in the way the conspiracy talk movement and the conversation going on with that had created all sorts of different social dynamic groups, and then they got more nuanced and refined in their discoveries and their personal feelings about it, and then split up, and often with a lot of bitter beefs involved, and and now everything is just very small pockets here and there. But the one thing that I think that is just amazing about metal that makes it different than like a lot of other contemporarily styled scenes or whatever, is because it has so much inherent energy and attracts so much inherent energy that it's constantly replenishing itself with new souls that are into the old amazing and wanting to, also make their contribution to the next insane level of heavy or dark or whatever way they want to pull on your heartstrings, if you will, right? Which Cradle did that, I think, greatly in the '90s on the level that you brought keyboards into that particular style and its own particular niche, and it's the way that it was distinctly different from Norwegian black metal, and Danny Filth kicking it up a notch with the Banshee screaming sentiments on top of it, and then you start getting into all the cool Hellraiser symbolism that further like just nailed what you were all about. I looked at it and I thought it was interesting. Like, I was reading through some stuff, and I'm not sure if you had any particular hand in the lyrics here, but if you worked much lyrically on Haunted Shores. I took a little excerpt out of it because when I was looking over the a lot of the songs, I was noticing this one was a different story than the others, where the others were more kind of like, oh, like, love has been denied me because of Christian bullshit, like, done in the most eloquent of poetry, beautifully written stuff. This one, like, this line goes, Herodias and I have led a phantom cavalcade through veiled and pagan history where superstitions reigned, and Christendom sought to pervert, but poets of my name sang of penumbral victories that sorcery had claimed, the Graal at mighty Caliburn, as votive offerings to an England re-arisen under vast, majestic wings. And that, like, that wasn't playing on some Satanism trope. It wasn't even playing on vampirism. That was, like, straight up, like, telling Albion have a pagan revival. And I was just like, woo, I want to hear more of that, right?
Yeah, that's
comments on Haunted Shores?
Arguably, it was a few things to say there. Arguably, my favorite track on the album, that one actually, and it's the album's just so it's all killer, no filler, as they say.
Yeah.
In my book.
Oh,
But
yeah.
bear in mind that most of those tracks were written before I even joined the band. They were the work of the original Cradle of, well, I say original, that's a bit, but the principle of Evil Made Flesh lineup. Dusk in Our Embrace was set to be their second album, and then when half the band left, that nixed that, and you'll have heard probably the remixed, put together early versions which have come out subsequently. Now there was some original material. What the band who recorded Dusk in Our Embrace, the quote unquote original version, as in the one that came out in 1996. There was nothing apart from the drums. There was nothing saved from the original recordings. So I, as for example, in my role, had the opportunity to. I listened to Ben Ryan's original sketches for what he wanted to do, but then added a lot to that and fleshed it out because it was very incomplete. But so yeah, Haunted Shores. We did Malice Through the Looking Glass is our one complete, full, 100% original song by that lineup. And hard not to love that for the reason that it came out so well. It still is one of the band's most popular songs. But Haunted Shores has a special place for me, partly for the reasons you cite, because the lyrical difference and the spirit of it. There's a speech at the end, a sort of war speech, as Danny used to call it, by Kronos from Venom. And if I recall correctly, Danny said that Kronos wrote those lines. If somebody's going to come in and perform lines like that, if they can come up with something themselves that fits, then let them speak their own words. So for me, that adds another level to it, because I think Kronos, or stroke Conrad, whatever you want to call him, I
Yeah.
think he really understood what that song was driving at, and why it was significant to have it as the final one on the album. Um, One other thing was, it's probably his Kronos speech is possibly it could be one of my absolute favorite segments of the album, because I think it's so powerful. I mean, he did a great job. And
Mm.
there's one thing that wasn't on the original that I added to that, and it was just, for me, it was like, it was something I just heard in my head, and I thought this will just push you over the cliff, as they say in Spinal Tap, and that was the timpani drums on that section,
Mm.
which were nothing to do with the original. So I added the timpani drums right at the end, and the thunder,
Nice.
and so one other thing to say, and this is not directly related to Haunted Shores, but the spirit of that sort of vaguely where black metal meets nationalism. Now, of course, as soon as you say those things together,
Mm.
maybe some ugly stuff starts to come up about the Norwegian scene. Some of it,
There's also hey, give Eastern Europe a lot of credit, okay?
yeah, exactly. So, but if I can use the word nationalism without fascist baggage or anything like that, there was an idea knocking around in 96, it might even have been as late 95, 96, even into 97, that I felt that the band had, went on to do a couple of EPs later, and there was the song "The Forest Whispers My Name" I always loved. Because for me, it was like, if Cradle were going to put out a single, that will be it. And it's maybe why we re-recorded it on Vampire. But there was this idea for a song called "The Black Union Jack," which we needed to have done at the time, but that was going to be a short, punchy Cradle of Filth song, maybe a bit like I can't remember the one they did now. They did it as an EP when Les was in the band, Lecter on keyboards. But it was relatively straightforward and to the point. So the idea would have been the Black Union Jack would have been this thing, and it would have been standalone, quote unquote, single. So if ever Cradle of Filth were going to attempt to get a song in the charts, it would be the Black Union Jack. Needless to say, it never happened.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, so like, and also like the other album you get big credit on is The Empire, Vampire, Like I like saying The Empire as fast as I can without turning it into Vampire.
Well,
um,
it is the Empire, strictly speaking,
yeah.
because including the band's demos, it's their fifth release.
Mm.
But of course, Vampire, lots of people think, "Don't you mean vampire?" Lots of like humorless Germans. But oh no, I'm just thinking of the press back at the time. Please, my friends in Germany, don't be offended. But they go, "Vampire is wrong. You mean vampire."
Well,
But
as you know, the Americans and the British won't let the Germans have a sense of humor. They might elect the wrong guy.
yeah, I can't see that ever happening.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they elected the wrong girl instead.
But yeah, but Vampire was, if I that's what I call it. So let's just go with that for the moment. That, or allow me to say that rather. That was a bit different from Dusk, in the sense that it was a real hybrid, because you had Nocturnal Supremacy on there, which already existed as one of the tracks from Dusk. But of course, because the drums on the Dusk version of Nocturnal Supremacy were recorded earlier, you get the much faster, more intense version of that on Vampire, which came out before Dusk. If listeners are still with me on this, re-recorded Forest, and then this other original material written by the lineup at the time, and John Piras wasn't on guitar at that point. He didn't join until '96. So you're looking at all the guitar work on Vampire by Stuart. And so in some ways, it was like, even though the finished 1996 version of Dusk is, more sophisticated and like erudite. I mean, the overall thing is kind of a more stately pace, even though a lot of it's very fast. And Vampire sounds like this more spunky, kind of youthful thing. It was just an interesting way round. It's a really interesting chapter in the band's history. They have the original band does a critically acclaimed underground album that sees them getting quite big quite quickly. The band implodes, gets put back together in a different lineup very quickly.
2 minutes,
That
by
all,
the way, just to let you know.
oh yeah, the almost rush release. this, EP to get out of a contractual obligation, this rushed process. From our point of view, we're trying to do our best, but it turns out to be one of the most popular releases. And then they kind of go backwards and forwards at the same time for this majestic album that, again, becomes arguably, the highlight of their career.
I know it's quite excellent. And because I know that one of the tracks on Vampire it's just keyboards. I forgot if you mentioned it. I'm forgetting the name of the track off the top of my head now. Right, and
She
so
mourns a lengthening shadow.
that's it. Yeah, that's the one. Right? Did you rewrite that one a whole lot, or
That
just
that's
played it as
completely
is?
that's completely new.
That's complete. So that's you. That's all you then.
Yeah, I had some help from Mags and Keith Appleton at
Yeah,
Academy
yeah.
Studios because they knew all the equipment, and we used some bits of equipment that I didn't own. But yeah, that was
Hmm.
completely original, to us at that time. That's brand new.
Excellent, excellent. So my last question. This is the one that my buddy Ed Corpse from Brain Dead had put out. He's a big fan of Hecate Enthroned, and he believes that you worked a little bit with John Kennedy before you were out of Cradle. Did you ever show interest in talking to the guys from Hecate, even possibly collaborating with them?
No, I talked to a very well-known band still going in the whole scene after Cradle about joining them, but I never met John Kennedy. I recently found out he'd passed, but no, I never so much as exchanged a word with the guy or the band.
Okay. Well, okay. Excellent to know. Thank you. All right. That's excellent. And we're about to hit our hard break right here. When we get back, we're gonna shift gears and we're gonna talk about Greg and how he does his thing on Legalise-Freedom.com, which is similar to how I do my thing, except much more like a refined gentleman of all things. We'll see you in a few minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here, the bottom of the first hour on Trigenesis. I am Zerilath, and we've been talking to Greg Moffitt, aka Damien Gregori, and we spent a good half an hour, our first segment, talking about his time in the metal scene, his time in Cradle of Filth, and talking about some of the absolute incredible music that he made with them and for them at that time. But Greg has done a tremendous amount. Is the reason why he's here with me on TFR as such is what he's done with LegalizeFreedom.com. This is some of the highest level of sophisticated and academic level of conversation about all of this stuff that we try to talk about, like not the petty side of politics, but certainly at least the how politics is affected by or affects civics, the way the government operates, because, conspiracy theories and talking about futurism, as well as aspects of the paranormal and human consciousness, and many of these other things that I kind of touched upon before we got started with the Q&A. Because like I said, politics, economics, energy, environment, culture and control, science, spirituality and consciousness, astronomy, archaeology, and alternative history, right? So all of those subjects, I was talking a little bit because I was talking about just like themes in music that you grew up on, Greg, and all that stuff. But you know, tell us a little bit about how you went through kind of like this, this process, because you said you gave up on the music side of being like a publisher, if you will, about 5 years ago. But obviously you've been doing Legalized Freedom since about, I think, 2012, right? And you're well educated. You were well educated when you left before you got into Cradle even. But you must have done a whole lot, because you needed that. You needed time for books, sir. You're a man of books, and I know it. Speak.
Well, yeah, I always have been. I didn't grow up in a house with a lot of books necessarily. I've just always been interested in um, sort of bigger. I think maybe it started with a fascination with a couple of major topics when I was a child. I've not really, I have thought about this before, but these two things have popped into my head instantaneously, and I think they informed a lot of it. One was an interest in the prehistoric past, and like all most little boys anyway, I was fascinated with dinosaurs. You know, I had plastic dinosaurs and dinosaur kits and books about dinosaurs, and all of that spoke to a time in the impossibly distant past, you know, when the Earth was still here, but humans weren't, as far as we know, and we can say so little about that time. So, but not just the, you know, the even before the dinosaurs, you know, the very origins of life on Earth always fascinated me, and then a related subject of interest, of fascination, was astronomy.
Mm.
I grew up watching the longest running TV show on British television, actually produced by the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation. It was called The Sky at Night. Um, and that was what it says on the tin. You know, it was an astronomy program, went on very late at night on a obscure BBC channel. And so those two things taken together, I think, set me on the road to asking. You mentioned the questions that I use on the website,
Mm-hmm.
trying to sum up what I'm trying to get at, which, you know, why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And those two areas of like the distant past, the origins of life,
Yes.
and what lies beyond the earth are intimately intertwined. So, and then of course, once I was able to start reading about these topics, because bear in mind, I grew up in a country where where the bulk of my childhood there was three, and then later on four television channels. So there wasn't this, and no internet, so there wasn't this wealth of access to information. So, you know, the library really was your resource. So
Yeah.
it was books it was going to be.
Exactly. And the framing mechanism is I think just great. You know, like you know, for me as somebody who's a diviner, I'm a man of tarot and runes. You know, and a heathen. It's the classic. It's your Norns. It's your three witches. It's the past, the present, and the future. And those questions are the quintessential questions that you ask the fortune teller, right? So this is kind of like it's kind of like here, let's just lay out with everything according to what you're talking about looks like, you know, and thus the futurism, thus the current affairs and also the ancient historical tropes, right? And you know, no doubt the ancient history was part of the music, you know, as we talked about what was going on with the writing in Cradle and such, right? So that's one of those cool things where, you know, when I'm listening to this, is like, oh, these are the kinds of metalheads I like, the ones that are thinking and talking, right? Um, and
I
so
guess what
yeah,
things that were picked up by bands like Cradle, you know, by lyricists like Danny, where they were trying to make more sophisticated, more developed versions of things that had been, if not in their specific detail, in their general thrust, had been picked up in earlier times. I mentioned earlier about Black Sabbath and Geezer Butler's lyrics. A lot of those are, you know, highly effective, you know,
yeah,
but rather simplistic. You know, but they're hard hitting, which goes with the music. And then later, you had other writers, say someone like Steve Harris from Iron Maiden. When I was reading about Maiden in the early days and first getting into them around Number of the Beast time
yeah,
and Peace of Mind, and commentators in the metal press in Kerrang were sort of saying, "Oh, Steve Harris has a lot of bookshelf inspirations," and again, he does. And many of the Iron Maiden song titles are just actually the names of films or books.
oh
You
yeah,
know, like
exactly. You know, like there's like one of the songs is definitely about Dune. You know, I think he actually says like Arrakis in the song or something. He mentions like literal names of things in Dune in one of the
yeah,
songs.
exactly, and that's fine. That's fine. That's, we all, as you know, as movie fans or
Sure.
sci-fi fans or horror fans, we appreciate other guys with the and girls with the same appreciation, and they bring it to life in the form of metal.
Yeah.
But again, you look at something like Quest for Fire from Maiden. It's like sort of comically simple, not musically, but lyrically,
Yeah.
it's as comically simple as the movie is, the original movie. So these things keep moving on, and things get more sophisticated and more developed. And so, even though the subject matter that Danny's explored, and bearing in mind that I haven't heard any Cradle of Filth albums after Cruelty and the Beast, I'm presuming he's continued to develop these things. And other writers who've come after him again are doing the same thing. Even look at the trajectory of some of the Norwegian black metal bands. Like, look, one of my favorites, possibly all-time favorite, Immortal.
Mm.
You know, look at what they were doing in the early days compared to what they went on to,
Yeah.
expand into
The last that Immortal album they just dropped is so like well cut, so perfectly performed. Like, whoa, where'd this Immortal come from?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. And lyrically wise, I mean, like, what's it doing that has the refinement to be appreciated? Using big words, using old words, and you're using foreign words. So, it's an expansion of one's vocabulary and thus an expansion with one's relationship with existence.
Absolutely. I mean, look, Danny, to keep the Cradle example
Yeah.
at the top of the list here. Some of his lyrics, you could look at some of his pieces and think this is just incredibly verbose and unnecessary, but it is pure poetry at its best. When he does at his best, he's a poet, and
Mm.
particularly the age that we have moved into, we can't say we're moving into.
All
There's
right.
this Orwellian kind of assault on language,
Yeah.
dumbing down, a simplification, and we've got less and less words to play with. So I think more than ever, we could do with some old words and some florid words and some foreign words or whatever, because we
Eh,
think in terms of
right.
language. If we don't have those concepts in terms of language, then we lose the ability to just have basic thoughts. So I
Right.
think it's really,
I
really, really important to keep that
Yeah.
language alive.
I choose because I can't help for whatever reason we live in this age now to at least use it as the obvious blessing that it can be, right?
Mm.
To speak against the bad guys and to be able to talk to them in poetic prose and in mythological context where I'm talking about evil dragons and that evil dragon is a particular man with an interest in needles, right? It's like, this is why I talk, about in my personal vloggings and things about living a mythical life, and that's why I got into metal. But I don't need to be in metal to do that because I can just do it as I'm doing it. But damn it, I want to be metal, right? And it's just like I go mad if I don't pick up my guitar at least once a week. So and then the rest is just me tolerating that nobody wants to jam with me, and that's life.
Yeah, well, metal's a good soundtrack to
Yeah.
a mythical life, or a life lived mythically. And let's just remind ourselves that you know myth does not refer to something that is pure fantasy, that is not true.
Right.
It's just that's the common parlance. That's what it became. The idea, oh, that's just a myth, meaning it's a lie. It doesn't mean that at all. We're talking broader mythology
Yeah.
in terms of Jungian archetypes and the Joseph Campbell model of mythology. The stories that humans need, and that the repeating archetypal motifs that come up again and again,
Mm-hmm.
not just in our lives, lived lives, out in the world, but the depths of our subconscious. And these things span generations as well. And in fact, they're common to the entire species.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, like the Norse, we got our god that the word brag is named after. Bragging rights, right?
Mm.
The ritual to the god Brag, per se, which, what do you got to brag about? Something mythological happened to you. You've got an actual story to tell of your life in a way that you felt and had deep, significant meaning, and you are capable of conveying that poetically, right? So guys like us, guys like Danny and my buddy Ed and everybody else that can put words to paper like that is a skald and can be blessed thus by that god.
Yeah, well, I'm learning here as well, because I'm interested in particularly in Norse mythology because of
Mm.
the connections to metal, but it's not something I've really delved into. I've got some uh, a couple of friends in particular who are, when I say they're academics, I mean, they lecture at universities, in medievalism or, mythology or ancient history. And they're also metal fans. And they have some fascinating insights because it's something that doesn't come together too often. Is someone with well, actually, I think it increasingly does in lyricists and in bands that we've been talking about and how metal's developed over time. But basically, the the marriage of uh, you know writing skill, both lyrics and music, and a deep appreciation, understanding of knowledge of whatever it is we happen to be talking about. In this case, Norse mythology.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. It really changes. It really changes your world. And
I mean, I've never really read any of
yeah.
I've never really read any of Mon Amarth lyrics. Okay,
Mm,
I don't own any of the records, but I've seen them live plenty of times. It's always entertaining. It's always a
yeah.
good show. It's always pure spectacle,
Hmm.
And some of the songs sound quite similar, but sometimes you want that. You don't want them to be going off, into weird cul-de-sacs. So I don't actually know um how deep their lyrics go. I mean, they seem to be, because they repeat again and
Yeah.
again, that this is an area that they stick with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how deep they are or how scholarly they are,
Right. I think that they're I think it seems to me when I really kind of like tune in, cuz like I've never, like, I'm not too much of like a lyrics guy when I'm listening, cuz I listen to so many bands, and then my life is happening, and so I don't retain when I necessarily look over the lyrics of something, but like I just listen to it over and over again, right? Especially my preferred albums. And a lot of it is more like it's got the grandiosity of like more the prose edda than the poetic edda, right? Where, the gods are more treated like superheroes, because that's what Snorri was doing, was turning the gods into folk heroes for the prince of Iceland, whom he was publishing these works particularly for, to keep Norse tradition in that Christian kid's head for a little bit longer. And so it's a lot of that and a lot of the Viking era, more than, say, what I would want to strive for is in a spiritual sense, which is closer to the Bronze Age, if not figuring out pre-Bronze Age, because I'm crazy like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I understand. I get it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's like definitely for when, a monomarth is just like, I just got to feel like a Norse warrior today, right? And then you throw that on, right? I think my favorite song at this point, I think, is As Loki Falls, especially because I can kind of play it on guitar now, which to nail that key riff, which is all finger tapping. That just makes me feel like I'm half a professional guitarist, as
Well, I mean,
sloppy
that's
as I can be.
the band's name just popped into my head, but however deep or scholarly the research or the lyrics are with the Monomarth, point is they're definitely stoking interest. I see this, in like
Yeah.
younger fans and stuff in these traditions and in this mythology. And I think I've interviewed the band a few times, for magazines,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Johan, the guys seem very sincere. Yeah, they're a metal band and they're out there to crush, but they seem genuinely fired up by their own heritage.
Yeah, yeah. As we should. It's one of the things that the globalists don't seem to like, and that gets into where, like, like, whatever walk of life you are, you need to be kind of invested in this subject matter, right? What Legalized Freedom is about and all that stuff, right? It's just like, because then all of a sudden you feel this strange force once it starts getting said in the upper echelons of the world's conversation that you hear on the major media networks. is this conversation that's swimming around in people's heads, and it changes the atmosphere of the kind of conversation you can have at the workplace or around your family. Like, oh man, there's a new thing that I'm into just got turned into a taboo, and like if you're a kid, you got to deal with that with your parents, and your parents might be kind of mom, let's try and pitch mom and dad on Cradle of Filth, which I don't know if you saw when I found a post. I posted it on YouTube. It was like from like I think the early 2000s or something, and it was like a BBC production of Cradle of Filth. Go like with the mainstream and like showing like the British like Church of England, like
Do you mean
upright
living with the
moms.
enemy?
Yeah, like not understanding the kind of satire or whatever that Cradle is, and it's just it was like a satanic panic kind of
Is it? I think this is
video.
the for people who are interested. I think this is the part of a series, and it was called "Living with the Enemy."
That
And
sounds right. I think that's what it
and
was.
it was this reality show that did what mainstream media likes to do so much, which is create conflict or stoke conflict. Not to say that there isn't any already there, but they're literally like they get um, a pile of flammable material and throw a match on it, and that didn't need to happen. But and they do it in the name of entertainment, allegedly. I didn't see the show. I saw some clips from it, but I don't think anyone came out of that very well. And I don't think the producers gave a shit, to be honest. It was more like, if we can get some ratings, you know how it works with the mainstream.
Oh yeah,
But all I
yeah.
can say is I think on that one, um, and when I was in the band, we were beginning to get these kind of offers, from outside of the metal scene. You could see some mainstream media people sniffing around saying there's something going on here. But I definitely dodged a bullet by not being part of that.
Right. Yeah, I would say so, because there definitely wasn't an opportunity for the band to have like there wasn't enough atmosphere put into that production for you know what it really was. It was just like, okay, here's some guys that have like a satanic vampire gimmick, and my children are now intentionally dressing up like something ugly. Now, today we see the same thing happening with people dressed up like clowns, and doing all sorts of stuff to their gender. And everybody was worried about you back in the day, Greg. You.
I know it seems like tame by comparison, doesn't it? Because all it really was harking back to the romantic era. That you could even look at this idea of like white face makeup and powdered wigs. Not that we had any
Yeah.
powdered wigs, but you know what I mean. And um, you know, this and frilly shirts and well,
Yeah.
certainly the era when I was in Creedon, it was
Half my friends have played Vampire the Masquerade to your music, sir.
well, there you go. There you go. So we were kind of like a bit of a bit of a mashup of things because we did this combination of kind of like gothic vampire chic, but also the leathers, kind of the metal thing. So it wasn't
Hmm.
uncommon for us to be like dressed in a combination of both those things.
Right. And like, look, you were deeply entrenched with Clive Barker's Hellraiser, and so you're also pseudo Cenobite pull off too.
Yeah, well, that came after my
That
era,
was
but yeah,
after your time for sure. I think it was like right after your time, wasn't it? Like Cruelty. That's when they brought in Pinhead to do the that backing vocal. We got about 5 minutes till break, by the way.
okay, cool. Yeah, I think it was. Again, I did listen to Cruelty, um, once, but nothing after that. No, 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 again, no malicious reason, but it's just that
No.
I
It
was
is
just
funny to hear it though.
I was on to other things.
Yeah.
It's not like some guy who his girlfriend breaks up with him and he spends all his time stalking her. Like sitting outside her apartment, taking photographs of her leaving. So it wasn't like this. You had to follow everything for your ex band because you wished them ill. nothing like that at
No,
all.
no, 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 no.
I came into that situation very unexpectedly, and I left. Uh, well, if not unexpectedly, it was certainly it all started and all ended very quickly. So again, that's why I said earlier about I felt like it was a slight detour in life. One that I would never give up. I'd do exactly the same all over again. But yeah, but the band had moved through so many different things subsequently. Um, thematically, with recurring things from the past and developed things in the future.
Yeah.
I'm the last person you want to ask about the arc of that band's development, from
For sure, for sure.
97 onward,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll put it to you. I'll put it to you this way, though. It's just like I would not have gone to see Cradle if if somebody didn't point me at Existence as Futile from 2021, that like pretty much like the last album. Because I was like, oh wow, oh, this is really good, and they opened with like the first song from that album too. So I was pretty excited, and then they hit all the right marks. It was a great show. So like Cradle's doing, they got their hits and their misses, and they got a lot of great hits. I did remember on your Scars and Guitars interview talking about eventually you just become the greatest band in the universe, and who cares, right? So they had their dip, so now they can have another peak.
Yeah, exactly. That's just the way it goes, and there's very little you can do about that. And I think we all see that. It's just the your life reflected in the outward world, because who of us who've lived any amount of time can say that everything's just been on the up constantly since the day we were born? However you perceive being on the up, we all go through periods of good and bad and difficulty and triumph and defeat, and hopefully we learn from it and keep moving through life. And so if you're an artist, then your catalog, or your whatever it is you're creating, films, books, they're a reflection of you, where you are in your life at that time. And that's quite a common comment that you get from bands in particular, isn't it? Saying, well, that's where we were at the time.
Yeah.
So in 1986, Judas Priest were doing Turbo. That's where they were at the time. For example, and in was it 1988, Celtic Frost were doing Cold Lake.
Yeah,
that's where they were at the time.
Yeah, we got about 90 seconds before break. And so yeah, like when did you find yourself saying like the Legalise-Freedom Greg Moffitt? When did that become like who you are at this time?
Oh, I've just always been the same. I can elaborate on that in the next segment if you want. It might sound a bit sweeping, but I don't go through persona changes. I'm just doing different things. So it's just expressions of the same thing.
Okay, I absolutely get that, right? Like, just it's just one of those rare things, because like that's a little bit like, I mean, I go through different kinds of changes, but I'm still like me deep down inside, right? Because that's coming from a place of like, well, I've always been like turned on, and like, I'm not worried about somebody judging me because I am an occult type of person, and I'm seeking deeper answers, and screw you, I know my morality and where it belongs, this whole thing. So that's what I'm excited to to just understand, because then I really want to get into and pick your brain on some of the subject matter that you talk about on Legalise-Freedom, just because of how much I cover that stuff and have been since I started doing this in 2012 when I was on Revolution Radio, of all places. So we're going to cut to break in 10 seconds right here. It's going to be the top of the hour when we get back. You've been listening to me talk to Greg Moffitt of Legalise-Freedom.com and Cradle of Filth. All right, welcome back, everybody. It is Zerilath here on Trigenesis. It is the top of the hour, and you have been listening to me have a awesome interview with Greg Moffitt, who is the host of Legalise-Freedom, Legalise-Freedom.com podcast, and he is the ex-keyboardist for Cradle of Filth, who is now doing astonishing things in the same field as a guy like me. And so we've been here, and we've been speaking for we spoke a lot about music in the first hour, even more than I thought we would, because we really had some more great stuff to talk about. Even in the second segment, that was kind of related, just because it was kind of talking about like your whole transitional period into this and becoming this, and you had a further story to kind of elaborate after we were talking towards the end. So please continue.
No, remind me, was that the story about the very last thing we were talking about on the last segment?
Yeah, that's right. You said you because I asked you the question about kind of like your quote transition into the legalized freedom guy, right? But you said that really you didn't really change. It's just you like to do the things that you do, but you had something more you could elaborate on. And I didn't ask any questions because I was saving it for now.
Yeah, so again, what I was driving at there was that you were saying, how did you make the transition into this? I did in terms of an activity I did, at least superficially, because I originally had the idea in 2010 for a blog about some of these topics that I've always been very interested in and was getting increasingly interested in. And that then developed into the idea of a podcast because I decided, well, I don't actually like reading long blog posts. I mean, I read books, but sitting down every day to read long blog posts, it's very time consuming. And I find with podcasts, you can listen to these things when you're driving, often when you're doing something else, even when you're going to sleep. So you can kind of double up your time there. So this was a different way of doing something I was always interested in, but that's different from becoming something else, yourself. And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that might seem like splitting hairs, but a lot of people with a public profile, and we've been talking about music and metal in particular, but you can apply this to movie stars, anybody with a degree of a public profile, especially if it begins to approach what we might call fame. The danger is that they come to identify with something outside of themselves, something that isn't them, if you see what I mean. So that's why I was just pushing back a little bit against the idea of becoming something else.
Yeah.
Because you'll see this all the time. Musicians, their career falters or maybe comes to an end. Their run of success ends, and some of them deal very badly with that because, as far as they're concerned, that's who they are, whereas it isn't really.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, no, there's certainly the thing where you kind of artificially construct yourself because because you've got kind of like, a personal agenda of like, no, I got to keep going like this or whatever, right? So you have to be something different because you're trying to fit it, right? Uh, you know, Me, I just assume so much. There was like a lot of people in our field, they go through their quote awakening moment where like, oh my god, there's all these things and this is so worth talking about because we need to go deeper about it, and like, but like you're already just kind of there, right? So like I'm just not used to that. Usually everybody's got a story, from my world. So it's actually it's actually kind of refreshing, right? Because like me, I almost have to turn, like when somebody says, "Oh yeah, when did you like start becoming a conspiracy guy?" And then I'm just like, "Oh my god, I don't know how far back you really want me to go on that question, right?" Because all sorts of things, piqued that interest, and I struggled with a million things. I mean, like, in the '90s, I barely was metal because like I was conflicted between worlds. I was raised Catholic, and then in my teenage years and that time, I was actually considering myself born again Christian. Like I would rationalize why I liked Metallica, right? I suppose because I didn't hear anything satanic about them, and like so I was a metalhead on the most superficial level because I had the moral conflict and I was weaning myself off of that. I probably have a more significant story of being into good music than I am of becoming a conspiracy theorist. Right? So
yeah,
you
a lot of people do have like a kind of an epiphany, and you can sometimes end up with and it's often a very good thing. As you say, I don't really like to use the word awakening as such because it has some in our kind of circles, whether it's conspiracy theory or some new age spiritual ideas or metaphysical ideas, it has these slightly negative connotations. But for many people, they do have like a moment when the world opens up to them in a different way, and they feel that they've got greater insight and understanding of themselves and the world around them, and that can be very positive. And equally, you do get kind of the zeal of the convert. Many people will identify with this, that they gain an insight, and they may even feel that it's unique to them, and they then feel the need to tell everyone else about it. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they go full on overboard into that,
I,
and
I
that
I'm
can.
I'm guilty. I am guilty of that. But in hindsight of 2020, I had every right to be.
But that doesn't devalue the experience for the individual as such, because
Right.
the reason that I started at a slightly lesser level, when I was young, the reason I started writing about music, started publishing a fanzine of my own in the 1980s, was because I was so enthusiastic about the bands that I liked and the records I was hearing. I wanted to tell other people about it. So at that time, again, the way to do it was, well, have a radio show or a TV show. Well, good luck with that in the 80s, if you're a teenager. But so I thought, well, I can type some stuff up on sheets of paper here, and I can photocopy it, and I can staple it together, and I can distribute it, by hand and word of mouth. It's just a way of communicating enthusiasm. So it's basically the same thing. It's like, I'm into this stuff. I've discovered this. Have you heard about this? So it is a bit religious in a way, because that's what the religious. That's why I used the phrase "zeal of the convert." You want to run around and tell other people about the good
Yeah.
news.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah. And I think that there's a very important discussion about human psychology and why that happens, right? Because, like, that's something that got imprinted onto me from like getting out of what didn't satisfy me in Catholicism, right? And so then I was looking for a certain kind of liberation, and you're a child, and you've got parents, and you're also, part of the Gen X that is in arrested development and almost a model for, what the millennial lifestyle was going to be. And so, thus, pseudo sheltered and a screw up and all these things, eventually, like, I weeded myself out of like that, but I don't know. I still had some sort of itch. I still had some sort of itch that mostly came from like I can't believe why people don't care about 9/11, right? Because I am somebody who was changed by 9/11 and wouldn't have made all the choices of that have made me who I am today if I didn't make those choices in 2001.
No, I mean that was one of the great life-changing moments for those who lived through it, was the events of that day and obviously subsequent
Yeah.
months and years. And there were other, I just call them temporal markers, or just things that show up in human history as significant. Just like the Second World War, the First World War, and back you go in history. But in the modern era, in my lifetime, the two most significant have certainly been 9/11. The world changed then in all sorts of ways that we probably haven't even time to talk about, tangible and intangible, um, real and unreal. And then what we lived through with the C-19 period, however you want to refer to it,
Yeah.
the pandemic period.
Right. Yeah.
That was, no matter what you think about it, it changed a lot of things, some of which have crept back to a little bit, closer to how they were beforehand. Many other things have not, may never. And there are lots of other sort of meta trends in play here. It wasn't just that little event, what that was in human history, how that was portrayed, what it wasn't, how people reacted to it or didn't. that's part of a bigger picture, but certainly that was a, how can I put it? That was certainly a welling up of human events. I think that, above the
Yeah.
surface. I think a lot of things prior to that and after that continue below the immediate surface of perception. But that was one like 9/11 where it really broke through the surface, and no one, no matter who you are or how asleep you might be, could fail to notice what was happening, on the earth at that time.
Yeah, precisely. And yeah, it was I found some initial comfort dealing with the C19 event from reading I read Sigmund Freud's analysis of the collective ego, and I came to realize the the two correlations that mattered the most. That the same kind of clinical terms for pathogens are used for psychic phenomenon, and thus you can code word mind control using psychological terms that are hidden under medical terms, such as a contagion of thought, right? And so all of these things were coming into play, and there was the two principles were that of the primal herd and the primal horde, right? And Freud's getting into like effectively like sheep thinking and zombie thinking. I'm like, this is actually extraordinarily relevant, and because like I'm a young guy, right? And so I have a lot of criticism of Freud, but this was one of those places where I was just like, Freud had a point right here.
Well, I think Freud, I deviated from very early on when he started going on about everything being about sex. I think Carl Jung is much more interesting, and he covers a lot of the same
Oh
ground,
yeah.
and developed it much better. And this is why the two of them, who were friends and colleagues at one point, had a break, and neither had anything to do with the other after
Yeah.
a certain point. But
That's
yeah,
because Jung was trying to tell Freud, bro, you got the Oedipus complex. You're obsessing on it.
yeah, yeah. This is like projecting. Yeah, totally, totally. But certainly, on as visceral as 9/11 was on a physical level, it was primarily a psychological event. And you can say the same about the C19
Yeah.
episode. Certain things played out in three dimensions and the five sense reality, but most of it was beyond or below, the surface of our immediate awareness. Um, I'll just throw in here a reference to someone whose work I was aware of in decades gone by, but really in the last 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years now, I suppose we could say, has become of immense value, and it's really arrived, as things often do, in one's life just at the time when they're meant to. That's the work of Rudolf Steiner.
Mm.
He was a late 19th, early 20th century German occultist,
Very
mystic,
familiar. Yes.
um, very, very interesting guy. He was a genius, really, I think. But for if you look at some of his work in this area, now the guy, hundreds of books have been published in his name, and many of them are transcripts of the lectures that he gave. He was constantly doing this during his lifetime. But even if you just grab a little collection of his works, like his one that's called On Epidemics, and think about what we've lived through in the last few years, and read this,
Mm.
written 100 years ago,
Mm.
you know, it's some of it is light bulb moments are exploding all over the place. So this guy was saying this 100 years ago, but this sounds like it was written a year ago.
Right. Well, one of the things that did kind of shock me is that the photos started emerging in 2020 of how they handled things in with the Spanish flu outbreak, right? And the Spanish flu outbreak, they were just like everybody's wearing masks. They were threatening people to wear masks with the same kind of attitude, and and a handful of other synchronicities to that effect, right? Because the more I think about it, the more logical sense it makes, because I did know for many, many years prior that that like, although yes, this is the way that World War One ended, what they don't tell you is that the Spanish flu is actually the thing that made people decide to end the war, because the flu was starting to kill more people than the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and of course, many column inches were written um, about the Spanish flu in recent times. People are always looking back for parallels. Well, those of us who not that I wrote anything about it, but media commentators and journalists who are focused more than simply just what's right in front of them do tend to say, well, is there anything like this are there any historical parallels? Has anything like this happened before? Interestingly, although I mostly do podcasting, I do blogging as well when the moment seizes me. And I did record, I think it was in 2020, a short video about 30 minutes um, entitled COVID 9/11, a warning from history. And that was drawing parallels to some of the events on a psychological level and archetypal level between the 9/11 attacks and the C-19 pandemic
Yeah.
events.
I think I did listen to that one. I know I've seen the title. I'm pretty sure I heard it. I've been listening to so much stuff. I was doing so much homework, Greg. You've got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of and I could do so much more. I don't know if you ever feel this, but I sometimes feel that I'm not being productive enough. I mean, not that there's
Ha!
any, you set your own benchmark for that, but if I could, clone myself and have myself doing all these things,
Oh.
that I wanted to produce and wanted to get out there, it'd be just an avalanche of information. But there's only so many hours in the day, and this is what I say when I'm confronted by something, an area of research or whatever that I really don't know about. I gave the
Yeah.
example back when we were talking about metal, about Norse mythology. I've got a surface knowledge of that, and you just have to intellectually and emotionally, you have to pick your battles. Choose what
Yeah.
it is you're going
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. When my
Because
buddy when my buddy Paul figures out how to make a legit homunculus, I'll let him know that you need one.
well, we could go off into a whole side area there because one thing that I've been exploring recently, particularly in the wake of the C-19 events, is the idea of it's kind of invasion of the body snatchers
Yeah.
type scenarios and about um, this idea that there's way more bodies on the earth than there are souls, and the apparently human entities that we all meet on a day-to-day level, are they really the same as us? If you see what I mean, and that can open up some very difficult and maybe even dangerous territory. But that's where I've been going a great deal,
Yeah.
uh,
I think about
particularly with
that.
certain.
Yeah.
I was just saying, particularly with certain guests that I've had on repeatedly, like Jason Horsley, Kingsley Dennis, James Tunney. These are names that you'll find all over my channel, and we're taking some increasingly deep dives into territory that very few other people are even willing to contemplate.
Yeah, yeah. I've been thinking about that one for a hot minute, right? Because a big part of the forefront of my mind has been epigenetics, right? And how our physiology can be altered by just the various nuances of the personal actions that we take, right? So I think about these people that have been you know socially isolated, right? The social isolation is a mental isolation, and then that changes all sorts of behaviors. You're now alienated from the familiar human world because you're doing things under all this process. If people, if they kept going for a few more years with a refined version of what they implemented in social distancing practices and digital interface practices, um, we would have seen more quickly, I think, this emergence of more of these kind of like people, those theories that the goo is making black-eyed children and that we're seeing the grayification process because of the conspiracy theories about the Greys being humans from the future that screwed up their timeline and they need our genetics here, and but at the same time they still need to produce their species emerging at the all of that crazy stuff is happening, right? And I think that the social conditioning can be more of that kind of thing as long as they got a hold of something in their deep unconscious and they've got them running a program on isolating that part of their unconscious that they need to resolve. And that's kind of like my Jungian analysis of it.
Well, even at a purely physical level, I think if that had carried on, you could have been looking at something that was, if not predicted, then certainly imagined a very long time ago. E.M. Forster, celebrated author in English literature, and his short story, The Machine Stops. In there, you have isolated living, pods, people away from others, only able to communicate virtually. You had a description of what later would be recognized as the internet. And you had a reality outside of that being lived by the protagonists that was completely different. You had a grand lie about what was happening in the world, but all the isolated individuals connected only virtually were believing, and then that they're living within the machine. And so his short story describes what happens when that comes undone. It's very similar in some ways to a much later tale by Philip K. Dick, who was ahead of the curve in so many ways. His story, The Penultimate Truth.
Yep.
Again, all these people living underground, isolated from what's really going on, and they're told there's a war on the surface of the earth. You cannot go up there. You must stay down here in these tanks, and live in this. You can never go onto the surface again. And then one of them gets onto the surface and discovers what the world is really like. And this basic idea repeats again and again in science fiction, and I look to this a great deal, to tell us something about the times that we're living through, and which comes first, the science fiction story or the reality. And it's all becomes very circular after a while. And if you don't mind me throwing in a quick plug for something else that I do
it.
I do a on vlog on my YouTube channel, Legalise-Freedom 1, a television and movie review series called Hauntology and Dystopia. Does what it says on the tin. Once again, I'm only 8 episodes in, but I'm enjoying that immensely. And it's exploring TVs and movies of the past that tell us a lot about the present and potentially the future. And that's in that context I mention The Machine Stops and The Penultimate Truth and other similar things.
I've listened to some of that. I need to up my British film and television game because, like, you and the guys, Thomas Sheridan, Sarah over on Wuthering Nights, it's all references to stuff that, like, I haven't even seen the Hammer Dracula films. Like, that's how out of touch. Like, we can talk about Doctor Who.
Yeah.
We can talk about a handful of BBC type things, but yeah, I gotta get my game on when it comes to that. Okay, cool. We got about 2.5 minutes before break. So these names that you've mentioned in over these couple of subjects that we've been covering this segment, especially when it comes to the 9/11 thing, the C-19 thing, are these your favorite people? Do you have favorite people that have done the work, written books or made films that have really kind of filled you with the clearest perspective of what's going on?
Well, that's kind of, you're following up something I said, which was mentioned, Jason Horsley, Kingsley Dennis, James Tunney. These are just, Thomas Sheridan definitely is amongst that cadre. People I've had on as guests repeatedly, who really, I think, we're on the same path of exploration and discovery. That's not really answering your question about people producing maybe media.
That's
but
okay.
These are some of the guys writing and podcasting and putting things out there that I have the most in common with in terms of where we think we're going with what the nature of this reality really is.
Yeah. I agree, which is which is why it's always nice having a conversation on the social media page for the show, and then like seeing where Thomas pops up and likes something that I said. It's just like, oh, cool, we're in accord, right? And that feels good. That's a great amount of connection. And the irony is that we're doing all right with it. We're not living in the dystopia, but we are still having a similar interaction as this kind of limited interactives that have been discussed in the science fiction novel, right? And
Yeah.
it's good that, and I think it's good that we all probably have some decent people in the real world. I got decent actual like woke based friend, like not woke lefty woke, but like awoke,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I know. That's the other thing that's happened, this conflation of words, and liberal now means something bad, apparently, and it used to mean something good in the past.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And and it still does. It's just that they tried to co-opt the word liberal with the other things that they're doing. We got 10 seconds here, so we got one break left to go. One more segment. We're gonna keep on with this kind of chat. You've been listening to Greg Moffitt of Legalise-Freedom.com. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It is Zerilath on Trigenesis here, TFRLive.com. It is the last segment of the show. You have been listening to me with Greg Moffitt of Legalise-Freedom.com, aka Damien Gregori of Cradle of Filth, ex-Cradle of Filth, long time ago, but very important time ago. And we've been chit-chatting quite a bit here about a lot of the stuff that goes on in the conspiracy world and our concerns about how we've been socially manipulated, and what kinds of further problems for both the innocent as well as the aware, trying to navigate what looks like the troubled future of the world at large. Although things do seem like, under certain respects, are going okay right now. Something that I want to do is I want to make sure that you got everything out you wanted to say about that kind of stuff we were talking about, but to stay sort of in the same vein, I did also want to ask questions from the more optimistic point of view, especially because, as someone who is studying the consciousness phenomenon, and the occult and all sorts of interesting stuff about history and human development, there's also a lot of potential for there to be awesome stuff, even if it has to kind of exist with the evil stuff.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of ways you could approach that. And again, we're into the last segment now, so we can only really skim over these topics. But I've we said what we said in the last segment, so
Mm-hmm.
let's move on in any way that you'd like to. You're right. I mean, I'm fundamentally an optimist when it comes to um, the future of the species. Life on Earth may end one day, but this isn't, and this is one of the things that we live with, particularly as a modern malaise, is materialism. Not just materialism as in acquisitive lifestyle, like just getting stuff, getting money, getting stuff, getting the girl, getting the guy, whatever it is, and just
Yeah.
living well materially, but materialism as a cosmology, as a worldview, thinking that what's on your TV or what's out your window is all there is, that we're born and we live for a little while and we die and that's the end of it. I don't see it that way at all. And it doesn't have to be any sort of conventional religious or spiritual tradition invoked here. I think that they actually ultimately extend from a deeper reality of that being the case. So, because I view the world, I view the cosmos and beyond in terms of what's known as the Hermetic wisdom,
Yes.
the perennial philosophy, as it's called, then I see things rather differently. And this is partly an experiential thing, but also partly just a question of knowing or sensing. You know, these are not things that I can come to you or any of the other much more learned um, scholars can come to you and prove to you in any way.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just see a reality. Reality is a much, much bigger thing than we are led to believe in the modern era, to the extent that time and space for me are not even fundamental. Time and space are within a bigger reality. So what we
Yeah, yeah.
perceive these things as being fundamental, they're just not. So again, I referenced the Hermetic philosophy, the perennial wisdom. A good go-to book and interview on Legalized Freedom. I mention these uh, because this is something very recent in, you know, on my website and my content. But one of the guests that I go back to again and again, somebody who's given me so much over the years in terms of learning and ideas and inspiration, is the American author and occultist um, John Michael Greer.
Right.
And he recently published his occult philosophy workbook, a 1 year course. I think he calls it In the Hermetic Wisdom, but it's a 1 year course in these bigger ideas, something that any of you or I and or anybody listening to this can get and explore a wider reality. And if you do it according to his suggested timeline, it will take you 1 year. And then maybe the year after that, you can start again and go through it. So all of what I've been saying is simply to point to a wider reality, that I think that for all of the negativity and destruction and all the pessimism and all the hopelessness that we're surrounded by, and some positive things too, that I just think there's a wider reality. Um, so I don't think this is the only
Yeah.
life we have. I don't think this is the only life there is. I think that the world revealed to us in five senses and three dimensions is a tiny sliver of what actually is. And in that in itself, and that doesn't mean that everything outside of this is good. It's not. There's evil and danger everywhere, you know.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I just think that there is more. There's reasons to be to go forward and to be positive and to strive and to not just think that whatever age you happen to be at the minute, you think, oh man, I'm gonna, will I get to retire? You know, will I be able to afford to go on holiday? You know, blah blah blah. This, that, and how am I going to provide for my kids? All of that's important on one level, but there's so much more to life in this world or the next than is given to us
Yeah.
on the surface.
Absolutely. And you know, that's like the you know, that's an intuitive approach. It's a shamanic approach in those respects, right? And I did actually want to ask you about those levels of personal experience, especially as someone who is a studier of the Fortean subject matter and the paranormal side of things. So, like, have you ever done shamanic journeys? Do you have your own personal UFO encounter or anything of that nature?
Well, this is interesting because for all the people that I've spoken to over the decades who have had these things and have done these things, I have never had anything that I would describe as a supernatural or paranormal experience. And beyond taking mushrooms a few times and LSD a few times,
Ha.
never anything that you would characterize, not that those are shamanic necessarily, but
Hmm.
never anything that you would describe as that sort of experience. I don't necessarily see that as important. I think that I've done what I needed to do. I think for some people, these experiences can be important. But I've never seen any lights in the sky. I've never seen anything that I thought, actually, what the hell was that? Everything has appeared in my life as it's
Mm.
supposed to be,
Hmm.
you know, within the matrix. You know what I mean? Everything's in place. But I understand that that's not all there is. But I've talked to
Yeah.
so many people who've had all these, as I say, what I'd categorize or what gets categorized as paranormal, supernatural, everything above and beyond apparent reality, profound life changing experiences. Somebody asked me today for recommendations on books about UFOs. And I was talking about, well, that just means unidentified flying object. That could be anything. You know, that could be a military aircraft. You know, but just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean it's an alien craft. And I referred them to the work of Mike Cleland and his book The Messengers, as a way of thinking differently about these sorts of superficial realities. So I've talked to so many people. Mike, actually based in the US, his work is absolutely fascinating. He documents so many real world cases of people he's met and talked to about these sorts of, experiences that appear to be beyond the realm of possibility, according to the mainstream. So I don't personally feel that, not having had these experiences myself, that I'm somehow missing out or there's something that I can't understand. I just maybe think that in this incarnation, in this life, that's something either that I've already done or that I'll do at some point in the future. These, like I said to you before about discovering, works when, like Rudolf Steiner's work, that came to me in this time, in this life, when it was meant to. So these other things already have or will in the future. So I feel like I'm kind of I'm deferring to other people, and I'm letting other people talk to me, and by dint of that, to my audience about their experiences of these things.
No, and no, that not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying that I have superpowers and you don't. I wouldn't imply such a thing. But I just, I was just curious, because you're so well learned on it. It would have been like, you listened to an interview with a guy about a shamanic whatever, and you said, but you know what, hey, maybe that's for me. And then you spend some money and you go do like a thing with a guy. And I'm not even talking about drugs. It could be just a very, very intense session that doesn't have an entheogen involved in it, right?
No, no, you're
And
totally right. You're
and
thinking
gets
of
you
something
there.
like ayahuasca, I guess, but that's just one route to go down that's been that sort of like shamanic tourism thing.
Right.
To use that as a microcosm, there might be some issues there because you're talking about cultural differences. Certainly, there's been a lot of people from the West, Western type societies that have gone to other parts of the world and taken part in something that's part of a different culture that may not have the same resonance or meaning. And you could question the value of that. But I mean, each individual takes away from these things what they take away, what they derive from it. And if they benefit from it, so be it. But I've certainly seen criticism of that. Again, it's what I've referred to earlier about looking for the answer outside of yourself. And for me, having a few psychedelic experiences was valuable. Actually, I really did take something from that, but it was very limited. After a very short time, I would say like, right, okay, I get the message of that. I don't need to do that again. You know, I don't. There's. I've learnt the simple lesson that there is there, which for me was simply that all of reality is one fabric. That everything is. What am I looking at now? I'm looking at my computer. I'm looking at some books. I'm looking at the street outside. I'm looking at the sky and the stars, and they're all fundamentally made from the same thing. That
Oh
was a
yeah.
lesson of psychedelics for me. And that's simply mirrored in quantum physics. You see what I mean? Which I came to later. So,
Mm.
but I think people can be seekers all their lives and constantly pursuing the next thing or the next guru or whatever, looking without themselves. And ultimately, the answer is within the individual. Ultimately, whatever this life is, whatever this reality is that we're experiencing, we do it alone. And that's not meant to sound pessimistic or bleak. It isn't. But that's the journey that we're on. When we incarnate and manifest in this particular world, as I say it, as human beings, this is something we're doing alone. And we meet other souls and we meet other entities which are not like us. Some of them do not have our best interests at heart,
Right.
but ultimately we learn from that experience. That's what this is. One thing I did do relevant to this was have a past life regression hypnosis session, and that indicated to me that this is far from the first time that I've done this, the kind of journey that you're and I and the listeners are on at the minute. I've done this again and again and again and again.
Mm. Hello.
Yeah, I'm still here. That was the end of the. I was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again and again and again, and I thought you were gonna say something after that. Okay.
Well, I was, but it was go ahead. So no, but that's the whole point. Is this is like for me this is like a cycle. You know, uh, that we I talked earlier about birth and death. At this short little space on this
Yeah.
little world, and that's everything. It's not. So not only did I encounter during that experience the idea that I might have done this again and again, but actually that we all do,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a cycle. When I said earlier about time and space not being fundamental, reality is not linear. There is no beginning and there is no end. That's a cosmological concept as well, even that you can apply to astronomy, you know, that there is no end in time and space because they're fundamental. So no matter how far back or forward we try and go in time, we will meet no end point. No matter how far out in the universe we try to go in any direction, we will never meet an end point
Right.
because all of that is within something bigger. What that thing is, well, I don't think, why do we imagine that our little brains and these weak little bodies that we have are somehow fashioned or designed or even capable of understanding all that is? I think that's a very, human centric thing, isn't it? A very modern, and to use a word I used earlier, a very materialistic, scientific concept.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. No, I've often thought about that, right? Because we understand that level of limit, but then also, we're also here going for it anyway, right? Like I didn't read Heidegger being in time because I felt like being limited today because my brain's not going to be able to hold everything that I'm picking up on. Although the more slowly I read it, probably the more so that's going to become apparent. But it's this amazing thing that happens when you hit a certain level of this knowledge that then kind of transcends it. It turns into that concept of gnosis, right? This internal knowing, right? That like it's sourced from you, and somehow it has the authority that would come from something you would normally have to cite, right? It's this interesting phenomenon when you have a moment of gnosis, and I think it's just the way that we're tapped in. I think it depends on your level of being capable of being tapped into the Akashic records and little bits and pieces like this. And if someone like me can be like just like out there kind of doing it, right, as a example to everybody else on a practical level, right? That kind of stuff kind of gets me excited because it can hopefully inspire other people to do it, and then everybody's kicking up everybody a couple of notches in their respective worlds.
Yeah, and I think this idea of gnosis, um, again, points to something beyond us. And even at the most superficial level, it's what we know as humans as, instinct, gut instinct and intuition. And these are things that Jung wrote about, and people have talked about throughout the ages. And I don't think it's um I think it's with reason, that's not reason as in sense, but as in, design, that these are things in the modern era that we're told we cannot trust. you know oh well, intuition, what's that? It's pseudo religious, you know what I mean? It's like you have a gut feeling about something. Well, be logical, and there's plenty to be said for logic. It's a process that is employed readily in many situations with good reason, but there's only so far you can go with logic. So I think the idea of
Mm-hmm.
gnosis reflects what is commonly also known as the sixth sense.
Mm.
When you just have a bad feeling or a good feeling about something, and these things aren't to be trusted slavishly, but they're to be paid attention to. It certainly, I can say that throughout my life. Here I am, unless things change radically, more than halfway through my life, and I can absolutely say, pay attention to your gut feelings and your spidey sense. And these things you feel, and this sense you have about the veracity of something. Don't necessarily trust it wholly, but be guided by it. Look into it. Say, if you're being told X, Y, and Z by the world and the people around you, and you just have this nagging doubt about it, well, explore that, because there's probably something there. And that, I think, is a very practical day to day manifestation of some of these wider things that we've been talking about, this wider
Yeah,
reality of,
yeah.
of things that are actually borne out, things that I think are being borne out and will be borne out increasingly in what we would now call scientific terms. So many of the things that are called supernatural and paranormal and magical in the past, within the framework of cutting edge science, of physics, ironically, um, these things are allowed for. Um, they're not explained currently by these developments in science, but they're allowed for because there's a just bigger reality, this non-material reality, to use the phrase again, beyond five senses and beyond three dimensions. If there is a vast, world beyond that, then all of these things that apparently the world can't explain and science can't explain and writes off and that we're told are all hokum, ghosts and demons and angels and all the rest of it, and aliens, maybe it all lies within that in ways that we can't understand, non-material realms, interdimensional realms. There's look, even you look at a few of the scientific mainstream articles talking about dark matter and dark energy.
Yeah.
And that basically tells us that we've got, 95+% of everything that's out there in the visible universe that we don't know what it is. And we're only inferring its existence from its effect on other things. What does that tell you? It tells you what your cat or dog would tell you if they could speak, which is we can perceive a bigger reality than you can. Cats and dogs can hear and see a broader audio and visual frequency range than we can. And right there, you've got a little tiny way of just saying, hey, humans, you're remarkable, but your pets have got the edge on you in some respect.
Yeah, right. Um, Shoot, I had something very, very good that I wanted to follow up on at the end of your sentence, and then it fell out of my head.
Well, this happens. I realize I've kind of hit you with some big concepts there, but well, we can just, we can follow on that, or we can go anywhere that you want to, as we draw things to a close.
For sure, for sure. Right, because like the because it's just a lot of interest with that level of connection, right? Because that just happens to be part of just my personal wheelhouse. My personal life gets so into this. Like I do magical spells, I do chantings, and I meditate, and I do qigong, and I do all this cool stuff, and then all of that I hope serves all my practical applications in running that relationship with the invisible world that I acknowledge will exist around me. I'm the kind of person that, like, at the very least, something's eventually going to show up in my dreams, and I'm not going to be able to ignore my dream experience. Thus why I have a relationship with Anubis, right? Because otherwise I wouldn't have gone to an Egyptian god for anything. But I get things like strange dreams, right? So, I remember what I wanted to ask you now. I think the term that I heard of is, and I want to know if you've studied up on it or interviewed someone who has studied up on it, of sentient plasma, I think is the right term, right? And because my understanding of this by definition is that this is kind of like the stuff on the invisible other side by which the manifestations of paranormal phenomenon occur. So when you see a ghost, the ghost is there occupying the space of a plasmic field that then takes shape and kind of manifests in the in-between where we can see it, right? And then that's the same thing that happens for other things, whether they're like how Bigfoot walks between worlds, or what an actual UFO is as a psychic phenomenon, which then gets you into the issues of other forms of spirits, the fae folk, etc. Do you have any knowledge on that?
Well, one book, I mean, backtracking a little bit, but David A. Moore, Evolutionary Metaphors, that's his short but brilliant book, which touches upon some of this. So David A. Moore, Evolutionary Metaphors, published just a few short years ago. He's a guy I've had on the show, Legalise-Freedom, a couple of times. But so you were saying sentient plasma, and then sort of spectral manifestations. There's a few things there, but I think it just plays into what I was saying earlier about there's being this wider reality. And, the ghosts. I mean, this idea of sentience, um, consciousness is really what we're saying here, or intelligence, because there is this idea that a cosmic intelligence or cosmic consciousness, I should say, is not really intelligence in the sense that humans are, or other similar beings if they exist, but that it's through humans that cosmic consciousness is seeking to become aware of itself. That humans are the universe becoming aware of itself. Self-conscious, finally just going, there is something here, and that for all the billions or trillions or quadrillions or whatever years, or who knows what time periods before this, there was a kind of dumb sentience, a kind of primal awareness. So I'm not really answering your question directly, but I'm just saying that there is this underlying field of consciousness or sentience, or however you want to put it, that, as I was saying a few moments ago, allows for all these things. Doesn't explain them, but it makes room for them and says that, yeah, this could be possible. And certainly this idea that, one person has, or this experience that another person had, could be, if not explained, then at least allowed for within this wider field of reality. So if you take consciousness as fundamental, which the best person I've had on the show working in this area is Bernardo Kastrup, a computer engineer. He also worked at the Hadron Collider at CERN in Switzerland. He's written very user-friendly, sort of books for general consumption about the idea of consciousness being fundamental, mind being fundamental, not matter. That our consciousness is not something that arises as an epiphenomenon from our brains. Yeah, exactly. That consciousness is fundamental, and matter is within that. And that's what I spoke to earlier by saying that time and space are not some fundamental scaffolding upon which reality hangs, but they are just within a wider reality. Time and space are the epiphenomena.
Absolutely. Okay, we got about 30 seconds left, so we're at the end of the show. So please go ahead and plug.
Okay, so main website, legalise-freedom.com. That's legalise-freedom.com. You can spell legalize with an S or a Z. If you're in the States or anywhere in the world, there's two different spellings. I just recommend that you go there. All the main stuff is there, over 400 shows, and it links to the YouTube channel and, Apple Music and iTunes and Amazon, all the other outlets. They're all there, legalise-freedom.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been my guest, Greg Moffitt from Legalise-Freedom.com. I will see you guys next week.